Welcome back. In the last video, we got started with Chef Inspec and we understood what Chef Inspec is all about, how you can use it for auditing and security testing or infrastructure testing purpose. We got started with a very basic resource in Azure. We got started how you could just test your Azure resource group, whether it exists or not, and whether it has certain location or not. We understood the syntax, how you can got started with it, and how you can refer to the APIs. This video, as promised in the last one, it's going to be about storage account, mocking storage account, and a key vault as well, so that you get a knack of how to start writing your audit or config or security or infrastructure testing for your infrastructure, whether you're working on Azure, AWS, or GCP. This video is going to be dedicated to Azure, but the way you're going to write your infrastructure testing, the way you write your chef inspect Ruby file, it's going to remain same for any of your infrastructure testing. So we're not going to test, not only going to test Azure storage account, we're also going to do it for a key vault as well, so that you kind of get a knack how you can use the documentation. So we're going to refer to the documentation to and fro. If I open my browser, I already have the documentation open. The documentation is pretty neat for the chef inspect, so you can use them. I am going to use the storage account one. That's the documentation which we are going to refer, and I would urge you to keep this documentation handy. If you go to the resource group in Azure, we see bunch of resource group, and that's how your real infrastructure going to look like as well. So I've got a resource group which has got bunch of resources, namespace and storage account. I've got another resource group which has got a key vault, and that's what we're going to test. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to create a new file. The file is going to be called as storage.ruby. Alright, let's start writing the configuration. So how do you write the configuration? First you do is you start with the control, and you control, in the control you tell what type of action you're going to perform. So it's going to be storage account testing, and then a do statement, and then the impact, how impactful your test gonna be. 1 being the highest one because it's gonna throw out the error. 0.0, it's gonna be the minimal one. The title gonna suggest what you're doing. Auditing Azure storage account. Cool. And then we're gonna start off with writing our test. So it's gonna be describe, the keyword describe. Describe what? Describe the storage account. So if you go to the documentation, that's the API which we're gonna use. Describe the storage account, and what all parameter does it need? If you go to the documentation, it needs bunch of parameter. Now this parameter are resource group, and then the name of your storage account, and resource ID, and a lot of other information as well. So if I come over here into my file and start writing the resource group, and start feeding your resource group here, and then the name of your storage account. That's how you do it. And then the do loop to get started. What do you want to actually write? What do you want to test? After the do statement, you're going to start writing your test. So there are two ways of defining variables. One of the way is you come over here, you pick up the resource group. Alright, you put it over here, which we have already seen. Another is you define global variable right at the top. Put it right over here, and then use the resource group. Should be comma. Alright, one way is that. Second way is you could just use import statement. So what you could do is just type in import, name of your variable, which is going to be name, and then the value. So my value is going to be value of my storage account. Come over here, put it in the quotes and put down your value. And now you could just, what you could just use is simply put in input over here and then just put down the name of your input. And yeah, that's about it. That's how you kind of define your input. So we're going to use this one multiple times. For now, let's probably use the actual value over here. That's going to be the name, so that we, in the same file, we understand what are the different ways of defining inputs. Alright, so our inputs are defined. Now starts the logic. What do we want to test? We want to start very simple. It should, first of all, the storage account should exist. I don't want somebody has deleted manually. And now I want to test some of the properties, like its properties dot supports HTTPS traffic only. So for my security folks, I want to make sure that all of my storage account, all of my objects in my storage account should be only supporting the HTTPS traffic. So that should be enabled. And yeah, that's what I want to test. So how did I get this parameter? So if I go to the documentation and if I go right over here, first of all, you get all the examples. However, you would see that you could just define the properties, and if you don't find any of those properties right over here in the example, you can always go back to the Azure documentation and you would start seeing all the properties right over here. So if you come over here and look at the properties and kind of search for HTTPS, you would find all of these properties right at the beginning. So if you come a little below, yeah, so that's where you see all the properties. You see the name, you see the private endpoint, you see the private connection, and if you come a little below, you see all those other properties as well. So all of the documentation you see is kind of has majority of the properties. That's what we are using actually. So if you come over here, you see that it has a parameter called as properties.https property, and its value is going to be boolean. That's why in our config we have defined it as a true, because boolean has to be true or false. So that's how you get the documentation. You can use the documentation and start writing your config. So we're going to start writing some of the more meaningful test. We also want that it should have encryption enabled, and you can get all of these parameters from the documentation, so don't worry about it. We want its so let's probably go to the documentation and pick up something else. Probably let's search for allow Blob public access. I've already used this in my testing, so I'm gonna use this one. I kind of remember it. So I'm gonna make sure that the public access should be false, because I don't want outside folks to access my blobs. Why would I do that? And I want to do a bunch of more testing. I want to make sure that its endpoints, I want to test the endpoints of my blobs. So if I go to the documentation and click on use the primary endpoints for blob. So there are multiple endpoints. If we go, so you have got your blobs endpoint, file endpoint, queue endpoint, table. So if I come back over here, primary endpoints dot blob, it should comprises of HTTPS. So there's a little trick we're going to learn over here. For all of the blobs we create, or all of the objects we create, the suffix remains same, which is blob.core.windows.net slash, and there's a name which comes over here, which is the name of your storage account. So if you come over here and pick up this one, so we want to make sure that blob should exist with this name, and we want to do it for queues, for tables, and for files as well. So if you go to the documentation again, you just can use the code right over here and just replace the storage account name. So this is Azure fundamental. Your blobs, your queues, your tables, your files, your URL should contain the name of the storage account. Let's make it a little neater. Alright, so don't worry about the trick. I've told you we're gonna learn a trick. We're gonna do that, how you could just variabilize all of this one. I want to make sure that all of because of my GDPR compliance, I want to make sure that all of my storage account should equals to West US, or rather, let's check what I defined over here. East US. I'm gonna make sure that it is all in small letters, and then I want to do a bunch of more testing. I want to make sure that it should have tags. Alright, so I'm going to end my test with the end syntax, one for this one and the second one for this one. So what did we do? We started writing the resource group, a variable, we defined the impact, we have one input as well. We're going to use this, don't worry about it. We started writing our test for the Azure storage account. We use bunch of variables, and then we understood how you could just use the documentation and start writing your test. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna clear the screen and then do an inspect. I'm gonna run my test, exec my profile. Remember, we created a profile, and then the target flag, which is going to be Azure. Obviously we're doing it for Azure. Hit enter, and this is going to start running the test. What I'm going to do is I am going to uncomment this one for the sake of cleanliness, and I'm going to run this again so that it only runs the test for our storage account. In the actual environment, you want all of the tests to run together. Alright, that's what we want. We want some of the tests to fail, we want some of the tests to pass, and you see that there were 10 tests. Out of them, 8 were successful, 2 were failure. That's absolutely fine. Alright, so the first test, this should exist. Yes, it does, and that's what we wrote over here. Its property should have encryption enabled. Yes, it has an encryption enabled. It has tags. Looks like it hasn't got any tags. Undefined local variable has tags, so it hasn't got any tags. That has failed. What else? So we want to make sure that it supports HTTPS traffic only. That passed as well. Its blob should be false. Public access should be false. That's again a good news. However, our test for the blob storage kind of failed. Let's look, because obviously there's a typo right over here, you could see, and rest of them did pass. Alright, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna make this pass as well. So if we run a test now, it should have 9 successful and just 1 failure, which is fine. That's how it's gonna work in the real life environment. Alright, looks pretty neat. What it is complaining is about we made sure that majority of our tests were passing. One of them is failing because of the tags. We haven't got any tags into our resource, so that's why it's failing. So now let's probably understand how we could define multiple test logic into your file. I want to make sure that one of my secrets exist in the vault. So if I go to the vault, if I go to my resource group, I go to my vault resource group over here, I have got a vault created. I want to make sure that this guy right over here in the secret code red should always exist. Nobody should manually delete it. Nobody should manually make any changes onto its permission. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing the test for it. I'm going to use the Azure Key Vault API, Azure Key Vault underscore secrets, and you can refer to the documentation. I've not memorized it. Vault underscore name, and the name of the vault going to be this one. Right over here, and I want to make sure that I want to use a where condition where ID include what? Code red. That's the name of my secret. Close the braces, start the do condition right over here, and I want to make sure first of all it should exist and its count should be 1, and I'm gonna end this one. How did I get to understand that the ID? So how could you just a where statement that where dot where your API values of your API dot where, and then the ID dot include the secret name. If you go to the documentation and if you kind of go to the secret, you in under the under the properties, it should have something called as ID, and then you can just use that IP for your ID for your secret ID. That's what I did. I used the ID and used the that's inspects keyword dot include, and I will make sure that the vault should exist. Now if I try to run this again, it should start testing, mocking my key vault, and start giving me back some results. Alright, so all of them were successful. It has tested the key vault successfully. It may want to make sure that code red exists, and then the secret exists and its count should be 1. Very basic test. So what I promised right over here, you see there a duplicate right over here, right? So what you could just do is you could simply remove this guy right from here, and what you could do is you could just use an input function. So you use a plus sign and just tell it that okay, please pick it up from already defined input as name. We've already defined name right over here, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna add plus sign and then the constant, which is blob core windows.net. So now if you kind of run it, it should take the input right from here and start running your test. Yep, that's what it did. Yeah, only one has failed, rest of them has passed. So this one, the blob, the storage account should exist, and yeah, that's the URL of our blob. It was able to successfully do that. So we could do all of the same step onto right over here as well, and over here as well. Let's check what have we done wrong. All right. Remove the quotes from here and from here as well. All right, looks fine. Yep. And if we start running the test again using the exec command, it should pick up all these input variable and start running the test. So it should have 11 successful, 1 failure, and that's how it is. Alright, so that's it for this video. I hope this was informative. I hope this has given you direction how you could use your documentation, Azure documentation, Chef Inspect documentation, start writing your actual config and audit files for your infrastructure. That's it for now. I'll see you in a while. Thank you.